Hello, dear friends. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm Ukrainian journalist, and right now I invite all of you to watch this latest update on Ukrainian battle map situation on the battlefield as of August the 1st. So please join and watch this video, like it. Don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel where you see it, and leave your comments just below the video. Today is the good day to sum up in some way everything what was going on Ukrainian battlefield during the whole month of July. But first of all, let's take a look on what is going on the battlefield right now before the sum up.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Let's get started. I'll begin with the Chasiv Yar agglomeration. Actually, not the agglomeration, but rather Chasiv Yar itself, because yesterday there was disinformation from the Russians claiming that Chasiv Yar had already been completely captured by the enemy. How did this disinformation even start? It started with them putting up their little flags, so to speak, all over Chasiv Yar. Here's their enemy video, which is nothing more than a PR stunt. By the way, this is a trimmed snippet of the video that I'm showing you now, friends, in this review. Because here, as you can see, the caption says Russian PR stunt, and then there's harsh reality. So the harsh reality is when our soldiers kill these flag bearers with drones. And this video, right after the stream ends, I'll be posting on my Telegram channel. I encourage you to subscribe, join, watch, read, and in fact, enjoy this video. Because in reality, this kind of flag carrying is a one-way road. I've mentioned it many times, and deep state analysts have written about it too, that the Russians have a certain fetish. Their commanders, their leadership, and this has come up repeatedly in radio intercepts, give the following order to assault groups. If you plant the flag, if you manage to take a photo with it, make a drone video, you'll get a month of leave. Almost no one ever gets that month of leave because all these enemy assault groups, of course, under various pretexts, mostly using anti-drone cloaks. So what is an anti-drone cloak? A specialized cloak that effectively conceals the thermal radiation, let's say, emanating from the human body. And by covering themselves with such a cloak, they sneak and crawl quietly so that our drones can't see them. They crawl through various groves very slowly, very quietly, reaching some positions in the rear, bypassing our loose lines, because right now there is no infantry warfare. Now, you know, it's more of a drone network war where drones play a crucial role. People, of course, still play an important role, but the strong points made up of personnel are very scattered, and there are very few of these strong points over a large stretch of the front. And gradually, the war is drifting more and more into a drone network war rather than, as it used to be, infantry against infantry. Nevertheless, the Russians slip through, infiltrate deep into our lines, very often with the specific goal of raising a flag, taking a photo or video, and then calmly going back on leave, just to create an informational picture, exactly what they tried to do in Chasiv Yar. The information about the capture of Chasiv Yar is not true. So, first of all, what do we need to understand? Chasiv Yar, administratively and territorially, is a very interesting, unique city. Look, let's see what its administrative boundaries are. Let's write it down. Chasiv Yar, Donetsk region. Here, you can see Chasiv Yar. The occupiers have stuck their flags in, and now I'll actually show an infographic indicating where they are, just roughly so you can understand in these and these areas. Right here, and a bit in the Shevchenko neighborhood, further south. But it's important to remember that Chasiv Yar also has a number of far southern districts. These are Chek number 2, Yuzhne, and Zemlyanki. The enemy hasn't actually set foot here, even though they, well, how haven't they? There was, let's say, they showed their videos. So let's actually sort things out with this map. They placed flags like this at various locations. About 13 or 14 points were counted by OSINT analysts where the Russians put up such flags, and in this way, well, they basically create this propaganda image. But in reality, putting up flags in no way equals controlling the territory. It absolutely does not mean controlling the territory. So holding ground and maintaining control are completely different matters, especially since most of those flag bearers are dead. So I state this responsibly. Chasiv Yar, yes, there have been certain Russian advances there, particularly if you look at the map and talk about them. Then these are advances toward the Shevchenko neighborhood. And in the northern areas of Chasiv Yar, there have been advances by the occupiers there recently. But in other southern areas like Workshop, number 2 or Zemlienki, well, there is no firm Russian foothold there. So don't believe Russian propaganda. And as they say, don't read those Soviet newspapers in the morning. Because in general, this whole flag-waving story is now being played out on absolutely all fronts, absolutely all directions. The Russians are trying to convince everyone of their large-scale, resounding successes. One of these directions is Novopavlivka, where they do objectively have some successes. They have had successes here for quite some time already, but alongside this, they try to dash into settlements, for example, like Timirivka in the Zaporizhzhia region, take photos there with their flag, and then they are eliminated very quickly. So in fact, in Timirivka as well, the occupiers have just published a new video where these flag bearers took photos at several spots. Although, of course, this is, well, how should I put it? Such actions, such moves by the enemy, obviously, if they reach a certain critical mass, like 5, 6, 7 flags being raised somewhere, then it becomes a sign that in the future there may indeed be the loss of a settlement or the loss of some area or the loss of a defensive stronghold. As of now, Timirivka could actually be lost in the near future. And that's a pretty lousy situation. I've talked about it before. So what exactly makes this situation so lousy? Well, the thing is, Timirivka is already in the Zaporizhzhia region. That is, by crossing the border between Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia, the Russians gain a certain advantage here. An advantage in what? An advantage in putting pressure on the Huliapol direction. And not frontal pressure, but pressure from the flank on the communications and logistics of Huliapol. I think that in the future, we will need to look into this issue in more detail. As of today, it remains a somewhat distant, postponed matter, but it still exists. But it is still a matter to consider, and unfortunately, it should not be neglected either, because by advancing in the Novopavlivka direction, the occupiers not only threaten the Dnipropetrovsk region, but also the Zaporizhzhia section of the front from a completely different direction than we, so to speak, could have calculated or expected danger from. Let us return, however, to the Donetsk region, in particular to Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk. Everything is very difficult in Pokrovsk. Extremely difficult. Let's start with the fact that yesterday there was a publication, a very unpleasant one for us, on the pages of the Daily Mail, actually a report about Pokrovsk. I think today it will still, the Daily Mail will cause, the Daily Telegraph, my God, the Daily Telegraph will still make a lot of noise. This is a British daily conservative newspaper that published an article saying that Pokrovsk will in fact be lost, because they even spoke there with the soldiers. The soldiers say, we will lose Pokrovsk and it's only a matter of time. I don't rule out such a scenario unless something extraordinary happens. What could this extraordinary thing be? Honestly, I can't even and don't want to speculate on this topic. Well, I don't want to speculate on this topic. There may be some non-extraordinary steps, perhaps, that are being prepared, but I am not aware of them. But the loss of Pokrovsk could realistically become a plausible scenario, in the sense that, for example, if they move towards Rodinske, here is Rodinske, the Russians would essentially cut off, as I have mentioned repeatedly, a logistical route, one of the few logistical routes we have in this area. In this way, the route goes up north towards Dobropilia. We also have another route, let's say, towards Pavlograd. And there's also this one here through Hryshyn. I drew it a bit awkwardly, but that's roughly how the route goes. That one exists as well. There aren't many of these routes left in Pokrovsk. Accordingly, the fewer routes remain, the fewer opportunities Pokrovsk has in general. Because this same soldier, by the way, who commented for the Daily Telegraph, he gave this quote: "The constant threat of drones in this area has turned even routine sorties into a deadly trap." And in reality, Pokrovsk is just one big trap. What are the Russians doing to the city now, and with those sabotage groups, by the way, that are entering Pokrovsk? Even the president of Ukraine acknowledged their presence in the city yesterday in his evening address. But that's not the main point. These sabotage groups are actually less concerning and worrying than the logistical threats. The thing is, the Russians are trying to, let's say, level the high-rise buildings in Pokrovsk. For what purpose? They're leveling them in order to gain a radio horizon for themselves. By the way, there's a video, I don't know whose video it is, whether it's ours or the enemy's, but with a panorama, most likely ours, with a panorama of Pokrovsk. What does it look like? Well, the city is really already significantly destroyed. There are hardly any buildings left intact, but the task that is currently a priority for the Russians is to level the high-rise buildings. Why? Because it's obvious that the high-rises serve as positions for our drone operators. I'm not revealing anything new here. Let's put it this way. Thanks to the high-rise buildings, we gain an advantage in radio horizon. That's why the Russians are physically trying to destroy these high rises, to take away the radio horizon advantage from our fighters and secure the radio horizon for themselves. The radio horizon is the distance. Let's say ideally it should be flat, because when there's a flat area, it's easier for a drone to fly over it. The drone's signal reaches farther, or even in the end, it's easier to lay fiber optic cables rather than having to go over, rough terrain. Accordingly, the Russians are now physically destroying Pokrovsk in order to reduce, so to speak, its built-up areas, depriving the Ukrainian forces of advantages and securing those advantages for themselves. And here, when we talk about the prospects of potentially losing Pokrovsk, and we really do need to talk about them because, we're not blind propagandists. These threats primarily lie in the fact that beyond Pokrovsk, there is essentially an emptiness. Beyond Pokrovsk, all the way to Volgograd, there are no major populated areas except for some districts. Well, perhaps with the exception of Petropavlivka and Peshotravensk, with their elevations and water obstacles. But overall, what truly opens up before us is a vast lowland, a remarkably flat plain, which once again, these very same deadly drone traps will inevitably turn into something I honestly don't even know what to adequately compare it to. Well, look, instead of just talking about it, let me show it to you on the map. This is a map, a topographic elevation map. The red color indicates elevation. Everything that's yellow is lower than the red, and everything that's green or blue. Well, blue is rivers, and yellow and green are lowlands. And you can see that, in fact, right after Pokrovsk and Dobropilya heading west, all the way to Pavlograd, it's basically almost a plateau. A 90-kilometer plateau. And if the Russians enter it, these 90 kilometers will simply turn into a zone of total destruction for anything that moves, whether by our drones or theirs, especially since the range of these drones will only continue to increase. And this is precisely the real danger and threat for the future scenario. That's why some of our fighters are sounding the alarm very seriously about the need to resolve the situation with Pokrovsk. In fact, this should have been dealt with much earlier, a long time ago. Because the scenario that is unfolding here right now, I'll say it again, it's quite possible that it's only a matter of time before we have to withdraw from Pokrovsk, unless something extraordinary happens to the Russian Federation or within the Russian Federation or something of that sort. It's just that as of today, they are pouring an unreal amount of their resources into capturing this settlement. The second most intense direction after Pokrovsk is the Lyman direction. It consistently remains at the top of the General Staff's reports regarding attacks in these areas. In particular, it's worth noting the settlement of Toretsk, which is currently marked as a solid gray zone on the deep state map. We can say for certain that the northern outskirts of Toretsk are a red zone, which are still being fiercely contested, both the settlement itself and the left bank. Our soldiers from the 63rd Mechanized Brigade are holding on to the presence near Zalichko and Zerebets. Just yesterday, they published a video of the tank battalion from this brigade. Our tank, our Ukrainian tank, is firing at the occupiers deep into their positions, specifically in the northern part of Toretsk, from a distance of about 4 kilometers. So even this video allows us to state that, at least partially, the settlement is definitely under the control of the occupiers, but fighting is ongoing for it. In other words, no one is going to give it up. Right now, generally speaking, along many sections of the front, no one, let's put it this way, is giving up settlements without a fight, except perhaps for a few recent exceptional cases when this happened in the Novopavlivka direction. Everywhere, extremely fierce trials are being set up for the occupiers with the goal of inflicting maximum destruction on them. This is what our defense forces are currently able to counter them with withdrawal, but with maximum destruction. And this is exactly what we are observing here in the Lyman direction. We are observing a similar situation with a vast gray zone in Verkhnyo-Kamianske, which de facto, let's say, is not under our control. What is meant is the physical presence, which has not been there for several months now. At the same time, let's say, de facto, it is not under our control, but de facto, it is not under the enemy's control either. Because the enemy here is simply in a total atmosphere of destruction by our drones, as has been repeatedly shown in videos from our brigades holding this direction. And in particular, especially if we even talk about the western outskirts of Verkhnyo-Kamianske. That is here, closer to Siversk, there hasn't been a time when, let's say, for more than a day, the occupiers have stayed in any part of this settlement or these locations and could report its capture, holding this settlement or anything like that, anything like that, anything like that, anything like that. Accordingly, not everything that is, let's say, gray is necessarily bad. The same goes for Torsky, the same for Verkhnyo-Kamyansky. I think that for a very long time, for the occupiers, this will mean the prospect of extremely difficult fighting in these areas, just as it is in Chasiv Yar. I want to remind you that right now, yes, the occupiers are spinning this whole story about capturing Chasiv Yar, but in fact, its defense has already been going on for more than 2 years. In fact, the fighting for Chasiv Yar actually began well after the capture of Pokrovsk in May of 2023. And today is already the last month of the summer of 2025. So the fighting for Chasiv Yar has definitely been going on for more than 2 years, and the enemy still hasn't captured it. By the way, they also haven't fully captured Toretsk, which is worth mentioning, even though the Russian Ministry of Defense officially reported its capture on their resources back on February 7th. Just imagine, on February 7th of this year, they reported the capture of Toretsk, and they still haven't done it. There you have it. That's the Russian era of post-truth for you. All right, so with that, I'll wrap up the frontline update in terms of the map, but now I'll move on to the analytical part. Some conclusions that should be drawn based on the results, including those from July. One of these conclusions, unfortunately, is the new anti-record set by the Russians in terms of the number of Shahed drone attacks on our territory. Here are the statistics and analysis from one foreign observer. Kyle Glenn is his name. He notes that Russia, well, it's not difficult. Anyone could have calculated this. He is simply the author of this infographic. So Russia launched over 6,000 drones at Ukraine in July. This is 1,378% more compared to July of last year, when 426 drones were launched. You can see this enormous statistic. Unfortunately, new negative records are being set every month. June also saw a negative record, with over 5,000 launches then. Now, to be precise, the total number of decoy drones and strike drones of the Shahed and Gerbera types amounted to 6,297 units. This is the exact figure, the relentless increase in the number of Russian Shaheds. So on one hand, this is a record, but on the other, if you break it down by day, it comes out to 203 drones per day, which ultimately isn't much different from the main intelligence directorate's data on daily drone production, which is 170 units. The main intelligence directorate reported exactly these capabilities of the Russians. Well, that's about right. There are people who say that it's already in the thousands. Shaheds will keep flying. For now, we haven't seen thousands yet, but without a doubt, the enemy's plans are extremely ambitious, and they will keep expanding. And by the way, as I've mentioned before, with Shaheds, they're not only striking deep into Ukrainian territory, but they're also very actively targeting the frontline areas. And that's a problem right now as well. The frontline areas, starting from civilian infrastructure and ultimately the railways, which they are trying to destroy in our frontline zones. And this problem needs to be addressed with a wall. As Madhyar recently said in a speech, we need to build a wall along the entire front, across all the territory from where Shaheds enter our airspace. As Madhyar said, the wall should be higher than the Great Wall of China so that it can hold back this onslaught of evil forces flying in from the Russian Federation. Because once the Shaheds have already penetrated deep into our territory, it becomes extremely difficult to deal with them. But at the entry point into our airspace, it is still possible to do so. This is the concept for the further development of events, so to speak, including the technology of anti-aircraft drones. Although the occupier isn't foolish either, they are developing a response to our anti-aircraft drones. For several days in a row now, jet-powered Shaheds have started appearing in the Ukrainian sky, and by all indications, so to speak, these are no longer Iranian, but specifically Russian-made, most likely with Chinese jet engines. They are appearing over our skies. Anti-aircraft drones are powerless against them, but that doesn't mean they can't be shot down by other means, such as man-portable air defense systems and similar things. So there will be a way to deal with them as well, but this only shows that we are in a constant technological race, and we need to stay ahead of the enemy. Ahead in terms of strategy as well. There's a very interesting aspect I want to highlight today. A few days ago, I showed and talked about which areas of the Rostov region and Krasnodar Krai, particularly along the railway, our drones are striking, disabling enemy logistics, specifically their railway logistics. These are very interesting events that have been unfolding here recently, and they are not stopping. That is, our defense forces are systematically trying to knock out the enemy's railway infrastructure, specifically in these southern regions of the Russian Federation. Rostov Oblast, Krasnodar Krai, and all the way to Volgograd Oblast, that is up to the river, the Don. They are, well, trying to knock all of this out. Among the most recent strikes, there is a small settlement here. I'm not even sure we'll see it on the map. There it is. Tenguta, Volgograd Oblast. It doesn't mean anything. It's a small railway, well, a small settlement, but quite a significant railway junction, which was hit just last night. And accordingly, train traffic at this railway station was restricted. But our drones attacked the railway infrastructure much more intensively the night before last, here in Kotelnikovo. Here, Kotelnikovo. And here is Tenguta. And earlier, Novocherkassk was attacked there, as well as other areas of the railway that connects Volgograd with Rostov-on-Don. These two settlements here are undoubtedly key in terms of the railway. Let me bring up this map. There's a Telegram channel called Oko Hora. They make good infographics and provide solid analysis of the front. I also recommend subscribing to them, just as, of course, to me. Here you can see the link to my Telegram channel. You can find it directly and also in the description of this video. So let's get back to the infographic. As you can see, first of all, the yellow lines represent the railway lines that have been attacked, the railway branches that have been targeted recently. The yellow and red dots mark the locations of attacks on the railway infrastructure that have occurred over the past few days, specifically the last 10 days. In the last 10 days, there have been 9 cases of attacks on railway infrastructure. The farthest distance at 450 kilometers was Kotelnikovo, which was attacked along with Tenguta during the night before last. By the way, everything exploded very nicely in Kotelnikovo. I even suggest you watch a video without commentary from the actual eyewitnesses of these events. Let's take a look.
It exploded. 2, 3. Unbelievable. Look at that burn. Damn, I'm really freaking out. There goes another one. Oh wow, I'm right across.
Well, as you can see, he's really nervous, so to speak. Why are these strikes happening? It's to make the logistics chain more difficult, to complicate it, to disrupt the enemy's logistics, especially during their offensive on the Donetsk section of the front. In other words, this is about worsening the so-called logistics chain in Donetsk Oblast and, in particular, in southern Ukraine. Because it's from Rostov that the railway comes in, which goes to the temporarily occupied territories of Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. And above all, it supplies the Donetsk section of the front. So right now there is a total blockade, or at least an attempt at a total blockade, of the Rostov railway branch. And these are systematic actions by the defense forces which cannot help but please us. At the moment, it's being done by drones. So far, missiles are not being used. Maybe this will be the surprise that is capable of somehow turning the situation near Pokrovsk in a positive direction. Such a deep strategic operation. Although, as of now, if we talk about the situation on the ground in Pokrovsk, well, it's extremely difficult at this very moment. Well, friends, thank you for that. Thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best until we meet again. Talk to you soon.